Friedman is a Hungarian Jew who had to flee from Nazi terror and went via Romania to Haifa, and then eventually settled in Paris, where he still is. He's over 80 now, and ever since 1956 he has been at the same place at Boulevard Garibaldi, number 33. And in the 90s, when I visited with him the first time, he still had a studio, and now he just works in his apartment. And he created his very own universe. And about himself, he says, "I'm a craftsman," and he actually invented a computer program as early as 1970. But he decomputerized, as he said, because there's too much dictatorship in the computer. And the computer only brings out the best results for the computer, but not for human beings, which I find something that is interesting to think about. As you can see, a massive production of models. The one that is sitting on the table is actually the model for a bridge for Shanghai, bridging the Pudong River. And he has given some workshops in Shanghai just 3 years ago. He did a lot of animated movies in the 1960s, so his way of drawing and using fine liners has very much to do with this rapid drawing that comes from drawing for animated films. And he says that putting together words and images like this might lead to some kind of universal language that could be read by all human beings. And most of these little brochures originated during the time in the 70s and also 80s, when he had different programs that were funded by the UNESCO at the time. This again is where you first go into his apartment cum studio. This is the table where he sits down to speak with guests, and I think he has guests every day. I mean, even though he is already a very old man now, he actively partakes in discourse, I would say. The bamboo model is actually part of the Museum of Simple Technologies, one of the few buildings that were actually realized in Madras, India. And what it shows us is that it's what you see, how the bamboo is connected, that a lot of his thinking, like his whole apartment, reflects this ville spatiale concept, shows that it's about making connections. And this again is the model another time. And a lot of model making going on. What he refers to as gribouillis. This is a model of, as he says, museum for graffiti, but of course not a museum like we think it traditionally, but a museum that would be there for public writing. And I just run you through a couple more of these images. He uses all kinds of trash for model making, and he refers to this as industrial fallout. This is a bird's eye view of his desk, and he refers to his desk as a shelf. Actually, you cannot work on this desk anymore, so what he does is, now that's again the desk in a close-up, and he sits literally at his desk, working on his lap, on A4. And he says that drawing is an intuitive process, that actually while you draw, your thoughts are formed. So there's this parallel of maybe not knowing beforehand where you will actually end up. A question we all face all the time: how do we archive all that stuff? So he tries to control all the A4 in those humble binders. And that's also part of the overflowing archive. And this is what Jonas Friedman's office in the exhibition looked like then. And we're still in Paris. We're visiting the studio of Lacaton Vassal, Jean-Philippe Vassal and Anne Lacaton. And the first thing that struck me when I went there is that there is a huge number of chairs in the office, a lot more chairs than there are people working there. And then I asked about this, and they said, yeah, so that they can sit down and discuss and look into one computer screen. So they actually deliberately went out to buy a lot more chairs than there are people so that they can discuss and work collaboratively all the time. And I think these kind of strategies of space making within an office tells you a lot about how the office actually thinks the process of making architecture, of realizing architecture, of thinking architecture. Both Anne and Philippe stress that they are very suspicious towards tools, that they think it's not the physical tools that can actually make architecture, but that the real tool is in the mind or in the head. And therefore, they draw very, very little. So quite the opposite of what we saw with the B6 and Alba Alto. Not the drawing that does the thinking while we draw, but to do the first line as soon as we know, as soon as we have thought it through, and then know we have to set this first line. And this used to be where it's one of those typical buildings that housed a lot of different trades. And now the classical things like sewing that went on there moved out, and this kind of loft situation is transformed into architectural offices. I think that's happening almost everywhere. As you all know, for Lacaton Vassal, this not the minimum, but the maximum housing plays an important role. And underneath this level, they have another level of the same size. So it's important that their collaborators have a lot of space around them. And in the back of the office, Jean-Philippe Vassal has been growing orchids for quite a while. And he says that the most important tool at the moment are these orchids that allow him to dream architecture in a way. And the globe he uses to locate where these orchids actually come from. So to develop a kind of thinking, you sit in one place in the world, but you could also always think yourself in other places. And this thinking together of a connectivity of places is important in creating micro-atmospheres, in understanding what you put into a place that will then become part of it. So this is Anne Lacaton, surrounded by different images they collected. And then Jean-Philippe had spoken about the orchids, and then I asked Anne Lacaton what her equivalent to the orchids might be. So underneath this African material, there's a huge, I don't know the English word, but you probably know what I mean, like this, in Spanish stores they have those huge hams that we then cut and slice, like serrano ham, yeah, like prosciutto. And they keep a huge prosciutto so that when they have a good idea, they can cut some prosciutto and celebrate. So the orchids and the prosciutto are very important tools for what they think creates an atmosphere in the office. And this was then the transformation for the exhibition. And this is the last place we're visiting together in Paris. I think that RSC was also part of the Boris Days once. And so probably you're familiar with the work of RSC. It's also a couple practicing in Paris, and probably most well known for developing scripts and trying to really push digital design and scripting in another direction. And it's mostly Stephanie Lavaux who works on the computer part of the office, but she is the one who actually doesn't appear in public very often. So we had the orchids, and now in the basement of RDC, what I found there, what they had used for a project in the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea was a gun. And it was then very complicated to get the gun to Vienna for the exhibition, because you cannot just ship a gun from Paris to Vienna. So you have to do a lot of very difficult things to fill out forms and so on and so forth, to explain to the Ministry of Interior that the gun is actually a tool in making architecture. The demilitarized zone between North and South Korea is one of the zones in the world where there's the most variety of flora and fauna, due to the fact that no humans have interfered as the result of the Cold War. So it's really a Cold War border zone. And they did some planning close to there, and this Cold War made them think about the war, obviously. And so they used, this is the certificate of the gun, that they're entitled to have it, which I then had to take with me in order to, and so on and so forth, had to ship. So here you see the bullets. And this is what they did. They used it to perforate a model, and then they would slice the model into different slices, throw the slices on the scanner, and then from this procedure take it to actual scripting. So it's a very long and involving process, but in the end it's not starting with the computer, but going to the computer at a point where a whole narrative was playing out in the mind to come to the form finding or to form generating. This was the way it was presented then in Vienna, and it has actually been sold after the exhibition. And I would like to draw your attention to this little brown board next to the monitor, which is empty. And of course it wasn't empty at the beginning, because they told me the most important tool for architects is to read Deleuze on Sacher-Masoch. So I went out and bought this book, but somebody in the exhibition must have really felt that this is a good tool to have, and took it with him or with her. This is at the office of UN Studio, which stands for, now that I don't get it wrong, United Network for Urbanism, Infrastructure, and Architecture. And again, it's a couple, Van Berkel and Boos, and they actually founded UN Studio in 1999, so it's been around for 11 years. And before setting up the practice, or along it, they published Move, 3 volumes, as a theoretical reflection on what they were doing at the time. So what Ben van Berkel said, that they don't like to do after theory, but theory as an integral part of the process. And Ben van Berkel described the role as the architect today, not any longer adhering to this traditional image of the master builder, but the architect as a public scientist. And what you see in the back are actually sketches, but he said he doesn't use the sketches when he works with his, there's 80 people working in the office there, but he uses words to communicate, and the sketches are a means to communicate with himself. This is to show you how this